What's going on, you guys? I'm here with a new video today. And today, you guys, I've got not one, but I got two amazing guests here on the channel. My two sons that I'm blessed with. Joining me on the channel again, I've got Mr. Dom, we were never sleeping on the couch. And my other son, the GOAT, as it clearly says on his shirt, Mr. Karan, the impeccable one, Gill. Welcome to the channel, you guys. Welcome back, Dom. Welcome back, Karan. You guys have both been on the channel before. Today, you guys, we want to do something a little special for you guys. We have multiple events coming up. We have new sets coming out that are going to change the format. But I thought there's nothing better to do than to pick the mind of two very, very good players in this game who understand the game on a level beyond myself, beyond the average player. And this is the type of content that will, just enhance your game overall. And today, they're going to go over what they feel are the top 5 current meta decks. Now, of course, we have Dabble coming out. We have different products that will be released that will change the format, so there will be multiple videos going up explaining those decks. But for today, we're going to focus on pre-Dabble for anyone that's playing in any events, regionals, YCS, etc. coming up this weekend. So this will give you just a general idea of what to play and what to expect. Before we get into it though, for my guys, do you have any shout outs?
Yeah, so a lot of people, like, either in my PMs or on Slim's YouTube comments and stuff like that, everybody has really been, and some of my friends as well, really been pushing me to like make a YouTube channel for like competitive Yu-Gi-Oh and stuff like that. And so me and my friend who's also a YCS champion, Kobe Short, we're going to be creating a YouTube channel today, and Slim is going to put it in his description for us. So that'll be awesome. You guys can check us out there. And then also, like, shout out my Metafy, Dom Couch and Metafy. That's also in Slim's description. And then my Twitter, etc. Slim always does a great job plugging me. That's my man.
I got you guys. I got you, man.
Of course. And then the last shout out is to my sponsor, who's actually right there, Top Choice Gaming, Karan, Gill, and he could talk about that stuff.
All right, and same old plugs for me. Shout out to Dragon Shield for sponsoring the store, sponsoring my team. It's awesome. Good to have you guys. Sleeves are insane, fantastic. Love those sleeves like crazy. Shout out to Top Choice Gaming, obviously the place I work, owner of this place. Love this place to death. Love my customers. Shout out to Slim for having me. Thankfully, we were able to figure out a schedule on our busy days, on our busy plates to get together, and yeah, that's more or less about it. Oh, also Gem Accessories, they're having a bunch of new stuff coming out. It's gonna be super sick. I think you guys are gonna enjoy it, and also TCG Player as well.
For sure. All right, you guys. Well, where we're going to run this, they have the decks picked in mind. I'm basically here just to have them, speak their minds on everything. Now, as you guys can see, we do have Tier Maker pulled up for you guys. And, of course, there's a plethora of decks, but we are only focusing on the top 5. Again, you guys know we focus on this channel strictly with the competitive decks of the format. There will be some honorable mentions probably thrown in there as well, but you really get to see inside their minds as far as how they feel the current format is for pre-Dabble. So, without further ado, I'll let you guys take the reins on what you guys feel are the top 5 meta decks for this format.
Sure. So the first one, it's actually 2 different variants. So I'm gonna pull both these icons up to represent them. I think they're both in the A tier. So I have Sharon represent like the combo tier element decks, and it's like Offspring, right? So like Lunalite or Scareclaw combo alongside like, or danger cards alongside the tier cards. And then just because there's not another tier icon here, I'll have Aluba represent like the pure tier element decks as well as like the branded tier element decks that are like more control oriented and meant to play like a couple turn long game, whereas like these decks are meant to like have the tier element deck as like an engine starter to get everything going and like kick everything into gear fast to get everything started for you. And then they're able to use like the tier cards they play as their grind game, because combo cards normally do not have like a fantastic grind game, but the tier element as an engine or a backbone like provides something that the deck can do for a few turns with cards like Kaleido Heart. And then yeah, and the branded tier deck or the pure tier deck are decks that are built obviously to facilitate the tier cards the best they can as an engine, but they also play a lot more defensive cards instead of aggressive cards like dangers.
And especially like with the like combo tier, is like essentially you play like a lot of cards that generate your engine and facilitate your boards depending on how you go about it. I think the combo tier, what's really nice about combo tier is the options it has, where like he said, the Scareclaw, Dangers, some of them play the Brave cards, which is kind of a pseudo checker for hand traps, because obviously like Griffin to a degree, or if you play Illegal Knight to play around Ruler to some way, shape, or form, it gives you that power in terms of tier element cards of what they try to accomplish in their board, and then as well as the Luber tier, whatever you want to call it, whatever you see it as, the grinding deck. Defensive cards are so important. It's always been an issue that I feel like combo always has a problem checking if they don't have the right cards at their access. So like for example, like Droplet's like a fantastic card. I believe like that card's insane, especially like paired up with a lot of things. I think defensive cards always find their way in formats, especially when we are not as combo players, we're not aggressively checking them and like essentially not caring about them. But that's where combo finds its place time and time again because of that reason.
Yeah, so pretty much like Karan said, how I would judge this, like, so this is the tier list for YCS Keto, but also the choice you make should be based on what you expect, and so I'll elaborate like which one I would choose based on what like you were expecting if you were to go to Keto. So like the reason you would play the combo tier element deck is if hand traps are like not as dominant in the format, or you find your deck being able to push through like 2 hand traps on average, 3s where they start to actually hurt, because like decks when they have 3 cards, if you can put up like any interaction or like 2 interactions and your opponent has 3 cards, you're probably going to win either way. You don't have to full combo. But why this like combo tier deck gets better than this deck is when like the runic cards are really, really popular, because this deck when it goes first will like eradicate your opponent with like Curious Griffin, and like end the game very quickly, and like Mystic Mine is not a card that can affect this deck at all, whereas like this deck has outs to cards like Mystic Mine, but you end up playing this game where like you have to draw the out to Mystic Mine before they decide to try to kill you, which can like put you in a losing scenario even if you have an out to Mystic Mine, which is why it's not as simple as just play the out, right? Unless the out is searchable like Eradicator in this deck. And then like the opposite is what's true for like the branded tier deck or the pure tier deck that plays a lot of non-engine cards, similar to Gunther or Christian Uranus deck from YCS Niagara Falls, minus Snow of course, is you'd play this deck if combo is like really, really dominant to try to eliminate the variance of going second against the combo boards and like try to prevent cards like Abyss Dweller from getting summoned in the first place, rather than trying your best with cards like Droplet or Super Poly to try to push through them going second. And then but this deck, the game can be simplified against this deck pretty easily. So if runic cards start resolving, your opponent starts drawing cards like drawing 3 cards off Fountain like even twice, like it's going to be really hard for this deck to win after that happens. But with that being said, like we can go into the number 3 deck, because I think these are 2 different decks. Like they play so differently. It's not as simple as just like those are tier decks. It's like this is like a combo deck that could play like Rite of Armistice as well, facilitates Curious and Griffin, and just uses the tier element cards to facilitate the combo end boards, whereas like this deck is just the tier elements as an engine and uses non-engine to facilitate the holes. The last deck the third deck is going to be Sprite and its variants. I'll talk about which variant I like more, but I kind of put all the variants around the same place, except for where is Fountain? Okay. And then I think that was all the...
And Tri Brigade as well.
Oh, Tri Brigade there. Where is that?
It's right by the Lord.
Okay. There's gonna be Sprite and like its versions, right? So I think that the Sprite runic deck is the deck that gets to play the least amount of non-engine, which can be a good thing and a bad thing because like the runic cards fill the role a lot of non-engine cards fill better, except in the case of like this when this deck is really popular because it plays Eradicator. Then like your runic cards don't really do anything going second, but unless you're playing against a deck that's flipping like anti-spell or Eradicator, these runic cards fill a really good role with being able to simplify the game. And you have to understand that like how the Sprite engine wins a lot of the time is by thrusting itself forward with advantage. And like if you're able to thrust yourself forward with advantage and you're ahead, these runic cards simplifying the game, putting your opponent down in card advantage, like just trading 1-for-1s when blue and jet give you like 2 cards every turn, you're just going to end up winning the game like throughout a 2-3 turn game because your opponent's going to have no cards and you'll have some amount of cards. Even if it's not very many, your opponent can't win when they're down that many cards and you're thrusting yourself forward with the Sprite engine. So the duality of these two engines, how they operate, just works like a lot. It works very well. And then, do you want to talk about these?
So the thing is too, a little bit hinting on the runic engine too, is like when they prioritize Ibli is like a card that I guess a lot of people don't know what it does, but for those that don't know it is, it's a level 2 that you can summon off Gigantic, and like you can summon it to your opponent's field, and when it's on your opponent's field, obviously if you don't play Lingeribo, that card says that the first action of what you need to special summon has to be linking. Yeah, some people can like try to push through it and try to like make it dark, but like Elf also checks it by summoning it back when your opponent controls a monster, of course. I guess it doesn't really matter if they control a monster, but you could summon the Ibli, and then usually the end boards end with IP, so you can unicorn back a monster, and then put the IP back on, or I'm sorry, the Ib back on their field, and like kind of have like a little soft lock, which is really good. And some decks are just not prepared for it, which is fair. It's like not very known in the Sprite combo, but like with the runic cards, how they facilitate the game, like Dom said, it simplifies the game with the spell cards. But again, it does has that recurring issue against the combo decks that, like the tier combo decks that do play Eradicator and anti-spell as well, because that card's still legal and that card's also really, really good. I think for the Evil Twin list, I think they're very solid in terms of consistency because you're playing a lot of cards that get to other cards to facilitate your combo. The only thing is, it's what the deck does in terms of power doesn't really compare to what the runic cards do, but you're playing the deck as terms of the concept of how the deck should be played. Some variants play the Toad stuff still, even though like of course Rodent Toad got banned this last list, but they'll play like Double Frost to try to solidify a Toad and kind of make it seem like nothing's really changed. But I think in the Evil Twin variant specifically, it's not giving like an arm and leg, but I feel like you have to do some way, shape, form of like really, really good extension, and it's really solely dependent on your hands to get like the quote-unquote god board, like the normal board that we used to get before. So I think that's like the best part for the twin stuff, just the consistency it gives, and the live twins, the concept of what they do, help the way Sprite kind of melds in with the thing. So like I think for me, like the Evil Twin stuff, you shouldn't, like in the Evil Twin variant, you're prioritizing the engine and not the Sprite cards, when the Sprite cards like themselves are really good. And like going back to the runic deck, the runic cards implement the Sprite cards as an engine, but with runic having the level 2 extender as an e-telly, all the big e-tellies, it just like becomes fantastic. But I definitely think the live twin one is definitely something not to sleep on, by any means necessary. I think the deck has a lot of room to play different variants. It could be like a control version, it could be like a combo version to some extent, but it just depends on how much you're willing to give up for that power, because that's always important in the deck for sure.
Yeah, so like how I feel about these decks, why I think these are worse options than playing the runic one, is these decks obviously are able to access the Sprite engine and vice versa. a lot easier than like Sprite cards don't necessarily access runic cards unless you play like Elijah Green's like Gale of Dogra deck and like mill spells and you drew one or whatever, but or like Gale Dogra summons the guy to get Hugin to get Fountain, like that was cool. And you try to put spells in grave and hopefully you have one. But why these are good with the Sprite cards but not as good as this one is the in-engine interruptions obviously do a lot more than like the runic cards provide in a nutshell. So if you open like a hand of a bunch of level 2s, these decks are going to do way more and provide more interaction than like this Sprite runic deck, because you're required to draw the runic cards as like non-engine cards, or what I would classify them as, even though you play so many. Whereas like the live twin cards, you could draw one instead of like combinations of multiple, or in the Tri Brigade deck, you can draw a fractal and it like threatens a lot of aggression to where your opponent has to start interacting with these Tri Brigade cards before they would even like get to interact with these Sprite cards. So they almost use them as like bait, and if everything resolves, your board is like better than the average Sprite board. But I think that like if I were to select the Sprite deck to play, it would be this runic one because it covers the most bases, and like it does the most when you draw both engines, but these do the most when you draw a hand of level 2s. And then the fourth deck, it's actually pretty close which one I think would be the fourth deck, but I think the fourth deck is Floowandereeze. And I think that Floowandereeze matches up like very closely to these because, sorry, bird brain. But yeah, I think that like M-Pen, Trap, and like Wind Barrier Statue is still like very, very difficult to deal with. When the Wind Barrier Statue is present, the non-engine cards like Super Polymerization that are popular cannot deal with it very well. Dimension Shifter is also just such a broken card that like not only acts as like Called by the Grave for cards like Effect Veiler and Ghost Ogre, etc. that are good against your deck, but it's also like impossible for him to play through that card like a large, like upwards of 90% of the time. That card will win the game by itself if he can play. So like you have to respect these type of shifter decks, and the Floowandereeze deck, well, it seems very simple, is actually very complex, and the deck just does so well when it's in the right hands. Like in the case of Nationals, for example, like in the hands of Pascal Manigat, who knew how to play this deck very, very well. I think the deck is very, very impressive, and when it gets to play how it wants to play, nobody is like still pretty unbeatable.
Yeah, and especially for the variants that like would play like double trap, or even to the extent of double Windbarrier Statue, I think by means the Smorg version is very viable. I think people have slapped in the deer in there as of recently. That card's at 3. That's how you used to play it back then. Don't know how viable it is now, but it is pretty unique to see, and especially everybody's getting like creative with their versions of the deck. Like I think the Smorg thing is like insane. I think those are fantastic. When you're playing 3 M-Pin, like it's really good. Back then, like when people were like doing the double M-Pin play, like that was almost close to unbeatable because it was really good. And then you can just set up the Windbarrier Statue on their turn. So like it's no loss on it essentially, because people even still forget that M-Pin is not a hard once per turn. It's just when it should be summoned. I think that's very important. And in the grand scheme of things, just the way the deck, I guess not. Oh, the way the deck vibes with each other, like it works very well. And I think the option of how consistent the deck could be, playing Prosperity, Duality, stuff like that, like it definitely puts that deck in some way, shape, or form a deck to be very much so afraid of.
Yeah, so like whenever M-Pen is like an impressive Yu-Gi-Oh card, or it's like very annoying to deal with, this card's just going to be like, or like this deck is just always going to be very, very good, even if it's not represented like by the masses. The like few good players that enter a tournament with this deck are probably going to do pretty well the majority of the time. Nadir Servant is a tool that we didn't really try to exploit with this deck in the past because it was at less than 3, so playing it over a card like Pot of Extravagance or something like that was not really warranted. But now that Nadir Servant's at 3, and you have Garura also, which is like a big difference than at Nationals where we like would have contemplated it. Your Nadir Servant in the turns that you don't Prosperity turns into like draw a card and Dogmatic Punishment. Because Empen also doesn't have to summon a Winged Beast. Empen just gives you another normal summon. So if you Empen after you Nadir Servanted, you can just like extra normal summon the Ecclesia, which triggers it to search Punishment, which is really, really good. Punishment is an easy way to clear cards and protect like the Wind Barrier statue, for example. Because like that deck's only out to that card the majority of the time is like normal summoning something and attacking. So like when you don't have map, Punishment is a card that prevents that from happening, or like you don't have to waste your Mega Raiza. You can just like strengthen your board even further with Avion and still beat it. But also there are other tools that Nadir Servant gets to generate for the Floowandereeze engine. Like Shurag is a card that is very, very good in the Floowandereeze deck when you play Nadir Servant and such. So if you have like any banished bird and you Nadir Servant send Shurag, now it's like searching Ecclesia, but it's also Shurag will also search any bird in your deck because they're all level 1s, which is like really good synergy. Because like if you have just Nadir Servant, you like Nadir Servant, get Ecclesia, draw a card off Garura, and then you're gonna like Ecclesia get Punishment, and then when you have a bird banished after you played on their turn, now Punishment is gonna search like whatever bird you want as follow up, or like even search a bird like Street or Toucan if you couldn't get access to them turn 1 to summon off your trap instead of the Rubino or Eaglin, because a lot of the times your Rubino will have to search the Wind Barrier statue. So yeah, I think this deck is very, very impressive and slightly better than the other option that I have that is a very similar deck, which won the last YCS, which is Exosister. This Exosister deck is very good for a lot of the same reasons as the Floowandereeze deck. It doesn't lose that hard to a lot of hand traps similar to the Floowandereeze deck. Like when it draws multiple pieces of the engine, it plays through hand traps really well, exactly like the Floowandereeze deck. And then it's also a shifter deck, so like Dimension Shifter is a card that like you can't really prepare for, but like when it happens, it's just really gross and gets really messy. It's not a card you can really have a plan for. Like you can try obviously, but you're never going to make your deck worse to be able to do something through Dimension Shifter. You're just gonna like in deck building make the decision to concede to Shifter like whenever it happens, because it won't happen that often during a tournament on average. And then like these Exosister cards, like notice the place of the other decks on tier list, right? Like it's funny that you call this a tier list and tiers at the top, but when these tier element cards are at the top of the format, these Exosister cards are going to go from like being here or here to up here, because now cards like I think it's Vadis is the trap card that summons 2 Exosisters out of your deck. That card is going to be way more impressive and impactful when your opponent is using tier element cards to facilitate playing the game, versus when they're not, and like your opponents are summoning Floowandereeze monsters or activating Rite of Armistice or Enchantress out of their hand. Then Vadis is down here, and like how impactful Vadis is going to determine how good this deck is a lot of the time. So like in like some previous formats, it would have been like down here decks could have played without the graveyard, but here like Sprite, Elf, and tier element cards touch the graveyard so much that this deck is going to be up here now on par with everything else.
Yeah, and I think in simplified formats like we are in right now, like the Exosister cards the XYZ just do so much, and they apply that pressure, being able to stop like the graveyard stuff, and then like reacting to when monsters are moved from the graveyard is really good. And the extent of like XYZs has always been a good thing, to an extent, especially when they have a deck specifically that thrive off it. So it's really good. You could even like leave. I think there's a couple exercises like if you leave them up, they become some way, shape, or form of an interaction. If your opponent does so forth, and then it could just become an XYZ. And like there's like I guess they're like mini dwellers. Some of them are like that. So. Yeah. Pretty good. And like Returnus is really good, attacking twice, being able to tag out to summon more. So like that's like really impressive in the grand scheme of things. And like a lot of their traps are pretty good. The Returnians also is good, not as good as Vadis of course, but like that card's also a bounce. In game states where it's simplified, it's the cards that the deck generates, and it's very consistent. It can play cards like Prosperity as well. They have their own engine searcher, which is PAX, which is really good. Yeah, I think that deck does wonders to a degree, especially in it's format dependent by all means necessary. But like to brief off on what Dom says, it's slowly on how the deck performs based on what are the best decks.
Yep. So it's like where like a deck like this places is based on how good its like in-engine interactions are against the rest of the meta. So like I said, like there are formats where it can be down here, and there are formats where it's up here, and right here it's up here on par with everything else. Abyss Dweller is like one of the most impressive cards in the format, and that is like the difference between this deck and the Floowandereeze deck, where like the Floowandereeze deck has in-engine interactions like M-Pen and Wind Barrier Statue and Mega Rise and Avion. This deck has like cards that clear stuff off the board, which can be very, very good versus the Sprite decks. Not super fantastic versus the tier decks, but it's enough. And then like against the tier element decks, you can summon the Exosister that I forget its name. It's got a bow and arrow, I think, but it the turn it's summoned, neither player can activate card effects in the graveyard, which means that the Exosister deck has its own Abyss Dweller or pseudo Abyss Dweller. So that makes it like very, very good against what the best decks are, which means in the hands of a good player, similar to Floowandereeze, this deck's going to be easy to play, but in the hands of like a very good player, as shown at like YCS Niagara Falls with Raymond Dye and Ryan Yu being the only ones in Top Cut with it, it's like no coincidence that those players representing the deck did a lot better than like the average, because those players are just very, very good and knew how their deck operated and made a good meta call. Now for like some honorable mentions, I don't think we'll touch on them too much, but I'll put them in the C tier, even though I believe some of them are like in the B tier just to represent that they're honorable mentions. But I think like this Math Mech deck, whether it's like pure Math Mech or like Exosister Math Mech, this deck is like good. It's kind of gimmicky with the Exosister stuff, because like you somewhat bank on your opponents not able to create an out, because if they create an out and they establish a board afterwards, it becomes difficult, and the deck doesn't get to play that many non-engine when you play the Exosister cards. But I think that if you played it, you would just play it more so pure, is what I would do, and you just play like a lot of defensive cards and like multiple ways to circular cards like Pot of Desires in your deck. Just try to play it kind of like the old pure Tri-Brigade deck, where you just like use Super Factorial as like a pseudo Revolt, even though that they summon different cards. They are similar in function, and you just you make like your little IP and Cyber's Wicked to turn into Appaloosa before you flip the Super Factorial, and it's like very reminiscent of the old Tri-Brigade deck, but not as impressive going second. I think that this deck is here and not further up, because if I were to play a deck similar to it, I'd rather just play pure tier element, because engine going against engine, the tier element engine is just going to be better than the Math Mech engine. So I think if you want to play a deck like this, I would just play pure tier. The next deck that I have an honorable mention, I'm going to do 3. It's going to be Eldritch. When it comes to trap decks, I think that like this Exosister deck is better right now, but like just being able to play like Flood Lich, Big Monster, cards that are hard to remove. Red Reboot was removed from the format, which is like a slight buff to decks like these. They're going to be able to do well. I expect like 1 or 2 to top every tournament, like always. It's a good deck for regionals. Like cards like Skill Drain at like a regional are just going to be really, really impressive because sometimes it's a lot wider of a field than deeper in the rounds at a YCS. And then the last deck that I'm super interested in for to watch for at YCS Keto is going to be these Alistair the Invoker decks.
The Michaelaro deck.
I love this card. Like, obviously this is the card I won with, so it has I have a soft spot for it in my heart. But outside of me having a soft spot for it, I think that the card is like very impressive, recycles itself over and over again. If cards like, I don't think DPE is fantastic right now because like tier cards float into it really well. Sprite gets access to cards like Smasher a little too easily, but and DPE like with no Verte is like playing 3 good cards for 2 like extremely bad cards. So I'm not sure how viable DPE is, but I think that Alistair is very, very good. Like clearing cards out of your opponent's graveyard is always good, especially against like the tier deck. Like activating Invocation is even going to be something that like forces Elf. A card like Invoke Caligula is always going to be very impressive going first. And like Nadir Servant at 3 is a buff. Garura is a buff in itself. I think that like this deck definitely has a place. I just don't think it's as good as playing one of these, but I do think it's like in the hands of the right pilot and like the right build and making the right like meta call depending on what you think is going to be really popular at your tournament. This deck could definitely be the deck for you.
Yeah,
And,
a lot of people love saying normal summon Alistair. So,
You're not wrong.
It is one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, what that card facilitates is really good. I like it a lot. What it can do, what it does, it just does stuff like no other can. So especially like engine.
What Dom did with what you did with Purgatory will never be forgotten. Fun fact. That was the monster that won the YCS for Dom.
That was the only time I summoned that card the entire weekend. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I love these cards. I love this card. But yeah, these are definitely my honorable mentions. Would be like Alistair, like Dogmatica deck. Maybe like Shadal as well. Unsure. Admittedly have not played with it very much because the next tournament I'm going to is YCS Minnesota. But the Mathmat cards are good. I think they're like a dumbed down version of like the old Tri Brigade deck. More impressive in some aspects, less impressive in others. About the same. And then this Eldritch deck is always just going to be around. Like even if you play like branded Eldritch, like something like Ryan Levine played at Nationals, like decks like those are just always going to exist. And I think that they're always fine. Like I never blame anybody for entering a tournament with those.
Yeah, Floodgates seem to be able to take control of the game at their pace, depending on which ones it is. Whether it's Summon Limit, Goes and Match, there can be only one. Like if there's worlds you can play all of them. So like sometimes they just solidify their spots in simplified game states. And like, let's say for example, like there's like Goes in paired with Strike, like that just outs a board, depending on the deck, of course. So like to a degree, those cards in conjunction with each other, like fantastic. But traps always find their way back, especially like with Rebo being banned. Like I've seen a couple LH decks that have resurfaced, and when hits like that happen, where a card that they really struggle against leaves, you just find people find their way back with cards like that. Because trap cards are powerful. It just depends. Like sometimes it's format dependent, whether you're going first or second. So.
For sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you guys put together a really, really solid list. Now, again, you guys, this is all pre-dabble. We're going to have them back on for post-dabble. We have multiple events coming up, like Dom said. For all three of us, actually, our next event is YCS Minneapolis, happening in a couple weeks, so it's gonna be pretty dope. So definitely see you guys all there. And yeah, thank you to my amazing guests for being on. You guys,
we appreciate it.
Thank you for having me anytime.
Well, of course, you guys are literally the goats. Why would I not? They're my sons. Like, what do you expect?
My Dom shirt.
Yeah, that's what I have to do. But yeah, really think this will help you guys out. Those of you that are playing any events this upcoming week, this upcoming weekend, if you're playing in the YCS or whatnot. So hopefully this video does give you some insight into what the format will be. And if you guys enjoy the video, you guys know what to do. Be sure to smash that like button. Be sure to follow all the links in the description below. We have all of Dom's stuff, as well as if you guys are in the area, come check out our locals over at Top Choice Gaming. Everything is always in the description. Hopefully we'll see you guys over there for their weekly tournaments. But that's all I have. Thanks to you again to my amazing guests, and we will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.